As you can see from the board, we'll be continuing our series on apologetics, and we'll be considering the topic of biology this evening. You have to bear with what's left of my voice. I've been battling some congestion, so we'll do our best to get through, but I might have to speed it up at the end if my voice doesn't hold up. So biology simply means the study of life. And the Bible has a lot to say about the topic of biology, about life in various ways. Now, so far in this series, we've considered a variety of topics. And the idea of this portion of our study on apologetics has been specifically about proving that the scriptures are divinely authored and that they are reliable based on some evidence. And that evidence is found by looking at some writings that were made, these scriptural writings, and analyzing them scientifically and noticing how these things could not have been known by these authors without a divine hand involved. They simply could not have understood what they were writing about without help by the designer of these things. We now know and can see and understand these things more easily based on the technology that we have, and that can serve as apologetics for us because it helps us prove and defend our faith in the Bible as a whole and God as the divine author of this series of books. So the topics we've considered so far are prophecies that have been fulfilled. We've considered some archaeological evidence, meteorological passages, and how we now can understand those things based on our science. We've considered some astronomical passages, and then geology and oceanography as well. And then finally tonight, we'll be considering a bit of biology. As much as I would love to just continue hammering this home and continuing this study, I do believe our time is probably better used elsewhere. So this will wrap up the series of this part of this series. There'll be some more apologetics teaching that I intend to do going forward, but the series of proving these passages will be drawing to an end today. So the first verse that we're going to consider, the first topic that the Bible talks about and that we want to analyze scientifically for its authenticity, is found in Leviticus chapter 17 and verse 11. This passage says, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement for the soul." Now we're going to zero in on that highlighted passage there. The life of the flesh is in the blood. Now we today can understand this. We know this very simply, that without our blood, without the oxygen and the things that are transported in our blood and transported away in our blood, without these biological necessities, we cannot survive, we cannot live. And anything that relies on blood, without that blood, it simply perishes. Now the biblical author of Leviticus here knew this, and that of course based on the divine authorship of God. And this seems simple to us, and it might have seemed simple to them at this time, but people throughout history have not always understood this as we do now. Now this next slide, I'll warn you, has some blood on it. It's cartoon blood, but if you struggle with the sight of blood, consider yourself warned. But there was this practice that is now, of course, well known, of bloodletting. This was something that was done for hundreds of years. It really became popular in the last several hundred years, and really was practiced up until into the 1800s. And this practice was believed. There's a theory around this. I had it in my notes, and I took it out at the last minute. I wish I had it there. There was a theory that was proposed, and that theory led many doctors to believe that the illnesses that people were facing were actually contained in the blood. And if that blood could be removed and new blood generated by the body, then the person would have a chance to get over that illness. That does seem somewhat reasonable if you take just a surface look at that, and we know there are blood-borne diseases. But releasing blood from the body is never, we now know, is never helpful for recovery and for the chances of survival of the patient. There were many people who were actually killed because of the bloodletting. The most famous example being our first president, George Washington. He was killed, or he died from this practice of bloodletting. They believed it would heal him, and in fact it did not. Now, this practice was continued until the invention of the microscope really helped scientists analyze what is in the blood, and more hematology was practiced, and it allowed doctors and scientists to study the blood and realize that there are vital necessities in our blood, oxygen being the most primary, that without that and with a decreased volume in blood, we cannot survive. Further study also revealed that tissue, whenever blood becomes absent from any tissue, it begins to die and decay virtually immediately without the presence of blood. The life of the tissue that we depend on literally cannot survive without blood. Our life literally is in our blood, just as Leviticus told the people thousands of years ago and still tells us today, if scientists would have just followed the scriptures. Now, there's some more biological evidence that the scriptures give us, and we saw one part of that this morning with Trevor's lesson on leprosy. We're going to talk about that here in just a moment first. But sanitation and infectious diseases were very heavily discussed in the Old Testament, particularly there in Leviticus as well. Now, at this point, I had this next part intended to talk about leprosy just a little bit in this way, sort of in a different perspective. And what Trevor went through this morning, it gave me a little bit more to add. I rushed home and I added a little bit to this. I've gone through this series, I think, about 5 times now, and 3 of those times, this time being included, I've had to completely rework the entire series. This time, I still haven't found all of my lessons that I've given over the years are still in a box somewhere in the attic, so I still don't have the physical copies. And then the digital copies that I had, those were on my work computer, which I now don't have anymore. So I had the unexpected blessing of having to rewrite this entire series this time around. And every time I do this, I find more things, and it just amazes me how often there are new things that I had never considered from the perspective of apologetics in the scriptures. And this morning, Trevor, when he was talking about the covering of the upper lip, that was something I had never considered from an apologetics perspective. And he pointed that out, how that covering showed God's wisdom with the disease of leprosy. And there was, as he pointed out, there was no way that those people could have known that disease was being transmitted by breath. And we still aren't apparently completely certain that that's the case even today. But based on what the scriptures say, I would certainly lean in that way, because God instructed them to physically cover their mouth, a leprous person, so that disease was not transmitted. So this is what I had intended to talk about with leprosy. In Numbers chapter 5 and verse 2, and it says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Command the children of Israel that they put out of the camp every leper, everyone who has a discharge, and whoever becomes defiled by a corpse. You shall put out both male and female. You shall put them outside the camp, that they may not defile their camps, in the midst of which I dwell." So I was intending to talk about this from the perspective of sort of quarantining and eliminating the spread of this disease by quarantine. And that was one step that God instructed them to do to deal with this, and the other being what Trevor talked about this morning in Leviticus 13 and 45, that they're to cover the upper lip. And it just kind of hit me. And there was another verse that came up about a month ago, and I'll cover that here in just a moment. But there was just a couple of things right here all of a sudden that I had never considered for apologetics, and it's just kind of an ongoing topic for me, and I'm always looking out for those things, and it's just very fascinating to me. So let's look at if there are still many others. Leviticus is full of sanitation instructions to the people. Really, Leviticus 13 and I believe it's 15, very many of those verses deal directly with all sorts of sanitation, washing their hands, and all of these things that they were to do. And this is very practical and useful advice. And without the germ theory, as Trevor pointed out this morning, without what we now know about germs and the transmission of germs, they sort of seem silly in a lot of ways. And no doubt they would have to the people at this time. And it sort of becomes evident because people don't follow these practices. If these things were obvious as they are to us now, but if they were obvious to these people back then, everyone would have been doing this. But these people were given this instruction, and the Jews seem to have kept many of these ordinances that they had in this way. But outside of that, disease really was rampant. And we can look at medieval history in particular, and the spread of diseases was extreme. And people were not following these simple biblical practices that now to us are very obvious. Let's look at this one in particular here, Leviticus 14, verses 5 and 6. It says, "And the priest shall command that one of the birds be killed in an earthen vessel over running water. As for the living bird, he shall take it, the cedar wood and the scarlet and the hyssop, and dip them and the living bird in the blood of the bird that was killed over the running water." Now we see here, and I highlighted these two particular passages, talk about running water. And this sort of is something that we might just kind of glance over as we're reading, but if we actually stop and really consider what is being implied here, we see a very important sanitary practice. Stagnant water, even in a container of water that is allowed to sit in any amount of time and become stagnant, the bacteria and the germs that are in that water will breed, and they'll continue to spread and grow. And then as other people interact and come into contact or even drink that water, then they will become ill from that bacteria. So the practice of getting fresh, clean, moving water, and there's a Hebrew term, and I have no idea where I am in my notes at this point. There is a Hebrew term for this living water, Mayim Hayim, and it literally means living water. And the idea is that this water is alive, it's moving, we've translated it to running water, but really living water is appropriate as well. It's not dead, stagnant, vile water. It's something that's pure, and it's sanitary to use. And the instruction to these people were to use that water instead of letting the water stagnate. We have another passage here in Leviticus in 15:13. It says that when he who has a discharge is cleansed of his discharge, then he shall count for himself 7 days for his cleansing, wash his clothes, and bathe his body in, again, running water. Then he shall be clean. There's another practice that the Bible tells us about that is common for us today in our medical practices. And this is one that it could be something that people have simply observed, and some of these things are that way. You can imagine that people over time, as they are figuring out biology and discovering things that make people sick and things that don't make people sick, they might just simply observe some of these things, some of these practices. And this is one of those things we're talking about circumcision, and that being done on the 8th day. I'll go ahead and read this passage. Genesis 17 and 12. He who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised, every male child in your generations, he who is born in your house or bought with money from any foreigner who is not your descent. But it specifically was on that 8th day, and this is something that we talk about from time to time in our studies. And the scientific reason for this, of course, is an infant is born with a certain amount of I better get to my notes for this. A certain amount of prothrombin. Prothrombin is a clotting protein, and a baby is born with a certain amount of this in their system, and this protein depends on vitamin K. And when they're born, they have a low level of this vitamin, this protein, and as they develop over the next 7 days, they continue to increase their level of vitamin K, which produces more prothrombin. Now on the 8th day, so on the 7th day, they're at about 100% of their amount of prothrombin as an adult. On the 8th day, they actually have 110% of what they will eventually have. And so a newborn on the 8th day will have more prothrombin, more of this clotting element than they will ever have naturally in their entire life. That is why this instruction was given to them. They have an abundance of a clotting protein, so it helps, of course, with bleeding and helps them. Now, this is something that, as I mentioned, could be simply observed as these circumcisions are taking place. Maybe one gets out to 8 days and they notice that infant doesn't bleed very much. These are the types of things that maybe could be observed. I want to pause and talk about that for just a moment. This idea of that these things could be observed is called observable reaction. Now this is where these instructions from God are simply noticed by the people, and that's why they're being followed. Well, it really doesn't take a great amount of study and reasoning to find the flaws in that type of logic. If we apply that logic and consider that, well, these things are just simply observed, there are three reasons why this thinking isn't very appropriate. For one, these things are provable now with technology. We can simply observe that all of these things are true, and we do have that at our disposal. But the two primary reasons are simply the sheer volume of evidence that the scriptures give us. We look at Leviticus alone and consider the sheer abundance of sanitation and the stopping of infectious disease spreading. The amount of wisdom there should give anybody pause and at least make someone consider what's going on here. But for me, really the most compelling part of this is that there is no erroneous practices that are discussed here. When we think about the time that these people were living in, and really they're no different than the people throughout all different parts of history, and even today, there were very prevalent scientific theories and ideas and practices that, for all intents and purposes, everybody was following at this point. There were some very outlandish ideas that people had. Some of the things that we've talked about. We have when we talked about geology, we talked about the Earth being supported on the backs of giant turtles that were swimming through the cosmos. The idea that everything revolved around the Earth. When we talked about astronomy, when we talked about oceanography, we considered men used to believe that the ocean was just a smooth, sandy plain that eventually came back up, and it didn't understand that there were vast trenches and great depths and mountains underwater. Today, there are theories that people have that that are just as outlandish, but they're widely accepted. We consider things like life coming from lightning striking a pool of single-celled organisms, and that somehow we have evolved from that event, or other macroevolution type of theories that sort of something came from nothing. Spontaneous generation was something that people believed for hundreds of years, that life could come from a sweaty rag and rotten meat, and that things would just spontaneously develop from that. And we now know that that's ridiculous. But when we apply that to what people are believing today with macroevolution and the Big Bang Theory and many of these other things, science just hasn't proven yet that those things are wrong. And science now proves that all the other sort of outlandish theories were wrong. And it's just a matter of time until these are added to the very long list of erroneous theories. But what makes the scriptures compelling for apologetics is that none of those erroneous ideas, and they were very common, and we don't know what theories were common at the time of the ancient writers, but they were there. None of those erroneous ideas made it into the scriptures. Everything that the scriptures say and reveal to us has been proven to be true and wise and useful. And that is a very compelling evidence for the scriptures. There's a few other topics, and I almost just went ahead and wrapped up there, but there's a couple other things that I do want to talk about while we're here. So there's this verse came up whenever his name's escaping me. Our meeting with in July, Bruce Roebuck. On Monday night, he talked about this verse, and I had never considered this from an apologetics perspective, but we see that phrase there, the skin of my teeth, that is used in Job. And when he read that, it just hit me. And I've been thinking about this particular, about teaching on biology for a month and a half or so now. So this is already in my mind. He said that, and it just hit me. That's a term that we use now all the time. And the idea is that it's someone escaped, or they got out with the narrowest possible margin. They barely got away with it or got out of a situation. They escaped by the skin of their teeth. And many of you probably know that this is a technically accurate statement. We do literally have a very, very thin layer of skin on our teeth. The technical term for that, for what we have, it's called acquired helical, and it's simply a layer that it is a dermis layer, and it is extremely thin. If we compare it to the thickness of a human hair, it's up to 1,000 times thinner than a human hair. It's extremely thin. You cannot see it at all with the naked eye. This is something that the writer of Job couldn't have understood simply by observation. And there are so many of these types of examples as we've gone through this series. There are so many things that, perhaps with the eighth day clotting, they might simply observe that over time, that phenomenon is there. But with something like this, why would the writer of Job mention escape by the skin of their teeth in an accurate way? There's simply no way that the writer could have understood what they were talking about when they considered this. There's another series of passages. Really, this is in Leviticus. Chapter 11 of Leviticus deals a lot with foodborne illnesses and prohibitions concerning food. We see several things banned from their diet: pork and shellfish and various scavengers from their diet. And there are reasons that we now understand very well why these things would have been bad for their diet. Pork, of course, undercooked pork is very dangerous to eat. It carries a bacteria, I'm not going to pronounce it, carries bacteria that is very dangerous for people to ingest if it's not cooked properly. And we, of course, know that at that point, people were not cooking food properly as we now attempt to do. We still don't always get it right, even today. And the sanitation regarding raw meat and things, they weren't being handled the way that they are now. So these things were very dangerous, really, for them to be eating. Shellfish, sort of the same. There are toxins and hazards that are there, and these things spoil just extremely quickly. Scavengers, things that so for instance, vultures and things that prey on dead flesh, those things carry very dangerous things for people in the same way. And those things can be very harmful to people, so it was just best for them to eliminate that from their diet. That was the instruction that they were given. And we now can understand that very easily, and it's what makes apologetics so useful. So I want to conclude the series there. I hope it's been helpful and beneficial with sort of building up our faith and helping us to prepare to deal with some of these topics. There is, and it really has sort of always been this way, I guess, but people oftentimes and many times do not believe the Bible is divinely authored, and that's prevalent today as much, I assume, as it's ever been. But we have every tool necessary, and that was the goal of this series, is to equip us, as 1 Peter tells us to do, to equip ourselves for the defending of our faith and taking the gospel out to others. This is very likely somewhere we might have to start whenever we deal with someone and who doesn't believe that perhaps God even exists or that the Bible is divinely authored. We might have to start with proving the Bible is divinely authored. That might be the first step in that conversion. So I believe this is a very useful and important thing to equip us with for our evangelism, and I hope that's been, I was successful in that. We're going to be, Lord willing, continuing with some other topics of apologetics, some more specific topics, and we'll be, Lord willing, continuing that the next time I speak. We want to conclude the series at this time, and we never want to conclude a service without extending the Lord's invitation. If you're here and you need to become a Christian, we want to offer this time for you. If you need the prayers of the church, or if you're struggling with your own personal faith, I would encourage you to seek guidance in that. Find someone you're comfortable talking to. I've said it a few times, but there is no reason that we need to struggle with our faith or have anything but complete confidence in the Bible and in God. So if you're struggling with that, I would encourage you to seek help. Talk to me, talk to one of the elders or Aaron or someone you trust. There's no reason for that lack of faith. At this time, we want to offer the invitation to anyone who needs to as we stand and sing.
This is your wake-up call to come and serve the Lord. Casting the world aside, come in and worship.
Welcome to the Chapel Grove Church of Christ. My name is Aaron Batty. I've been a member here for several years now, and I just wanted to introduce you to our church, what it's all about. We've been here since the early 1930s, which is really a long time for a church to be around, and I don't think that happens by accident. But to tell you more about what our church is about and why it's such a great place to be a part of the family, let's just hear it straight from our members.
The most important thing to me about a church is that they're dedicated to God and that they get their truth from the Bible, which Chapel Grove definitely has.
Because of the people here. It's a church family that I think is like none other.
Because you can feel a real connection and genuine love between its members.
Because of all the family.
I like playing with my friends at Chapel Grove because my friends on it and singing.
It's Bible-based, and you have a lot of people here who care about you greatly.
The fact that all the elders and evangelists and each member really, the amount of effort that they put into making sure everything that you hear preached from the pulpit is backed by Scripture.
because it has been very supportive of me over the 27 years I've been here.
Because it's such a great place to raise our family. We love our friends here.
Because of the family atmosphere we have here and the strength and encouragement that we get to follow God.
I was completely welcomed into Chapel Grove with open arms, and I was treated like a family member and immediately invited to Bible studies, over to people's houses for supper.
You know, it's not an immediate rush once the services are over for everybody to leave and go their separate ways all week long.
With that said, we want to invite you to come visit us sometime in person. Every Sunday morning we worship at 10 a.m. where we partake of the Lord's Supper. We have teaching, prayer, and a cappella singing. In the afternoon, it's at 5 p.m. on Sundays. Every third Sunday is at 2 p.m. and we'll stick around and have lunch together on the grounds. Wednesday nights are at 7 p.m. So come check us out at any time. You can find our contact if you have more questions at our website at chapelgrovechurch.com.
Open your heart and mind to share the living word. Come and worship, worship the King. Gather together now, we come to serve you, Lord. Laying our burdens down, we come to worship.